Good morning, everyone. If you would please turn to page 9 in your booklets. Page 9, we're looking at lesson 11. And once you're there, if you would go ahead and write today's date and then start the retrieval practice. If my colleague would stop the video now, we'll come back in about 3 minutes after you have worked on the retrieval practice. Okay, 3 minutes now up. Please make sure you have a pen, purple pen, and highlighter ready. Should have purple pen in hand, either tick off your answers or write in other answers. So for number 1, how is the character of Macbeth presented in Act 1? Probably the first thing that comes to mind is that he's seen as quite brave, or you could also use the word valiant. Duncan, for example, calls him Brave Macbeth, for well, he deserves that name. Macbeth is also presented in other ways in Act 1, but probably brave is the one that comes to mind. That's fine for today. For number 2, Mr. Utterson, I think you could describe him as loyal. He's also hardworking. He's also kind. There are other words that you could use to describe him, so it's fine if you've come up with some other ones. And then number 3, what is the poem exposure about? Well, that's today's lesson. But hopefully you've put something about soldiers. You might have put something about soldiers being unhappy. I put soldiers who question their purpose. Okay, purple pen's down. And what we're going to be doing is notes on exposure. So if you turn the page, I've reprinted it because I wanted you to have the version where you did the unseen yesterday and then a fresh version. And I'd like you to start off by copying down the meaning of the poem. So writing that down. The meaning of the poem is that soldiers feel attacked by the weather. Also, they are losing their faith in God. And finally, war is monotonous. That means the same thing repeated over and over. War is monotonous and even perhaps pointless. So just a few seconds to copy that down. Okay, either at the very top, I was out of room, either at the very top or maybe towards the bottom, if you would write down this context. So the poem was written by Wilfred Owen. Wilfred Owen was a World War I poet. He was a soldier in World War I. He died age 25 in World War I. I think it was pretty close to the end of the war that he died. So that's a bit of context for you that you need to know. Okay, make sure you have prepared your page. So you have your VIP corner down here. You have the word structure written up here, and language and tone. All right, now that I've said that the poem is about these 3 things, I'd like you to choose 3 different colors. So the soldiers feel attacked by the weather. I'm going to go with yellow. And my colleague needs to pause the video while you get your colors organized. That's fine. They're losing their faith in God. I'm going to go with red. And war is monotonous and perhaps pointless. I'm going to go with blue. Now what I'd like you to do, and my colleague will pause the video, is I'd like you to reread the poem, and I'd like you to look for evidence of one of these things. So choose one of these. Look for evidence, anything that you think connects into them feeling attacked by the weather, for example, you would highlight in yellow. Okay, if you'd like a bit of a challenge, you can be looking for more than one thing. But I'd like to pause the video for 5 minutes to give you time to reread the poem and highlight evidence of one of these things. Okay, we're going to start by looking at all of the language that ties in to being attacked by the weather. So, stanza 1, merciless iced east winds that knife us. This, of course, is an example of sibilance. You got this alliteration with the s sounds. So we have merciless, iced, east, winds that knife us. Okay, so this bit right here is the sibilance. It almost creates kind of a hissing effect, which again, if you think of hissing, you might think of snakes, creates quite a dangerous connotations of danger here. So they're in danger because of the attack of the weather. If I go too fast today, or if you don't have enough time, I am going to put this on our classroom so that you can get caught up at home. Stanza 2, it's not just so here it talks about the east winds, and here we've got more description of the wind, where it says the mad gusts tugging on the wire like twitching agonies of men. So the tugging on the wire, that's referring to the barbed wire between the two areas of no man's land on the field. So comparing the gusts of wind on the wire to twitching agonies of men. So here we have a simile. And of course, it's referencing death here, the twitching agonies of men. Then in the next stanza, we have the misery of dawn begins to grow. So even the sunrise is a misery. Rain soaks. I thought that could maybe be a bit of being attacked by the weather. And then in the fourth stanza, they've got the bullets going through the silence, but it says that the bullets are less deadly than the air that shudders black with snow. All right, so here, I think you would want to zoom in on shudders, that verb there. So the air is overwhelmed with the snow, and we don't think of snow producing anything that's black. So again, kind of this idea that the weather, the snow, is evil, malevolent. Sorry, I don't think I spelled that correctly. So the snow even is evil. Carrying on into the next stanza, pale flakes with fingering stealth come feeling for our faces. So it's like the snowflakes come feeling for our faces as if they're going to attack the faces. So this is quite a sinister tone. And we have the use here of alliteration. And then finally, in the final stanza, we've got the frost will fasten on the mud and us. So if something fastens on you, you can't get rid of it. And again, we've got more alliteration here. And the frost is going to kill them. It's going to shrivel many hands and pucker the foreheads crisp. So I think it's saying that they're going to die from the frostbite. Okay, so just looking at that as an example, we've got some key devices here. So alliteration is a key method that is used, at least when describing the attack from the weather. If we discover that it's used for these other things, we'll jot down alliteration in our VIP box. Let's now talk about any evidence that shows that the soldiers are losing faith in God. All right, so we're looking at the second to last stanza here. For God's invincible spring, our love is made afraid. Therefore, not loath, we lie out here. Therefore, we're born, for love of God seems dying. So here, for God's invincible spring, here it's showing that God is powerful. And I think it's showing that it's not being very kind. They talk about being afraid. So maybe they're afraid of God, or maybe they're afraid of their fate. And here We lie out here. For love of God seems dying. All of this here, and of course, you've got the repetition of for God and then for love of God. All of this here seems to imply that the soldiers are accepting their fate of death. It's almost like they've given up hope. Okay. All right. Then that leads us on to the third thing that I asked you to look at, which is war being monotonous and even perhaps pointless. Okay, so let's look at this beginning with the first stanza. You have this real sense that because of the monotony and the pointlessness of what is happening, that there's this real sense of weariness. We can add in under here, under the tone, that it seems quite hopeless. Let's look at some examples. So here it says, our brains ache. So they're just physically exhausted. Wearied, we keep awake because the night is silent. Worried by silence, sentries whisper, curious, nervous, but then nothing happens. Okay, a few things to note here. Sentries whisper, curious, nervous. So sibilants here. We also have a triad, a list of 3. And then we have this, but nothing happens. Now, this phrase is repeated throughout. And because it's repeated throughout, it emphasizes the monotony. But nothing happens. What are we doing here? But nothing happens. So just over and over, just waiting for something to happen. In the second stanza, it says that incessantly the flickering gunnery rumbles. So incessantly means something that that doesn't give up. It just keeps happening. And it's separated here with the 2 commas. So I think the 2 commas there really emphasize this word, that it's just ongoing, this misery of the battle. And then, of course, we have the rhetorical question here. Third stanza, we only know that war lasts. So they only know these 3 things. War lasts, rain soaks, and clouds sag stormy. So here we have a triad. Dawn comes up every day, of course, once more, but nothing happens. Now, this connective, but it seems to emphasize that they're expecting something else. They're expecting something to happen, but nothing happens. So we're going to write down that the connective emphasizes that this is contrary to expectations. All right, then we have in the next stanza, we have the fact that they're this idea again of them being so exhausted, so we drowse. And then we have another rhetorical question. Is it that we are dying? So they don't know what is happening. Is it that we are dying? They're alive, but they feel like they're dying through this monotony, through this pointlessness of war. And at the end of the next stanza, it's interesting. We turn back to our dying. So here we have the question, and it's like here they provide the answer, or maybe it's a realization. Really powerful part of this poem is the perspective, is the viewpoint. So it's not. It sounds like all of the soldiers rather than just one soldier, and I think that's really important. So in the VIP corner, if we would write in the viewpoint of all soldiers feeling this way. Also really important is that it's written in present tense, and that adds to the sense that it's ongoing. Make sure there's not apostrophe there. Okay. Right, let's see if we have more monotony. Lovely, lovely monotony and hopelessness on the next page. And I think it's right here. But nothing, but nothing happens. Okay, now that gives you quite a bit to look at with this poem. We've talked about kind of the key structural things here. The key language device, of course, that you've been able to figure out is the alliteration, and in some cases, the sibilants. There are also some key quotations that you'll need to memorize for this poem, because remember, this poem is one of the 16 power and conflict poems. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to put a box around the key quotes. So you could choose a different color, but we're going to color over some of the ones that we've already chosen. So you might just want to put a star or maybe a box. I'll just make myself a little key right here for the key quotations, and I'll do that for you now. All right, we want to make sure that we have key quotations to match up with each one of the meanings. So for soldiers feeling attacked by the weather, if you would put a box around merciless iced east winds that knife us. Of course, knife is quite interesting because that relates to violence, which of course relates to war. Then to connect in with war's monotonous, if you put a box around but nothing happens. Also put a box around like twitching agonies of men. Then go down to the 5th stanza and put a box around pale flakes with fingering stealth come feeling for our faces. We've already talked about the sinister tone, the alliteration, the stealth, secrecy, but it seems quite sinister. Here it says the flakes are feeling the faces. It's like they've got their fingers on their faces. So I don't know, could we say that that's a personification? What do we think? Let's think about that. Is that personification? Just having a think. I don't think it's our strongest example of personification, but it does seem quite invasive. Just abbreviating personification there. All right, for the key quotations as well, to link into the idea of losing the faith in God, if you could just put a box around, for love of God seems dying. Okay, you might have noticed earlier that I'm not going to assign this homework. So if you would just X out that box. And now I'd like you to look at task 3, which is consolidation. And what I'd like you to do is work on answering these questions. You've got lines in your booklet to answer the questions. Now, what I've done is I've given you the evidence that you could use for each one. So this is how you're going to start off. Owen skillfully describes the sounds of the battlefield. He writes, use number 1. Here's number 1. Flickering gunnery rumbles. Right? Then you're going to add in a sentence of analysis. So here we're going to zoom in. The verb rumbles, And then I'd like you to put in some analysis there. What does that make you think of? What is that saying about the sounds of the battlefield? Right, now I'm going to go over all three of these, and then you'll have time to work on them. Number 2, Owen describes how dawn brings no hope to the suffering soldiers. So Owen describes how dawn brings no hope to the suffering soldiers when he writes, "The poignant misery of dawn, her melancholy army." Now, several things that you could use here. The fact that dawn is being described as misery, this is an abstract noun, and that it's being also compared to an army. And it seems to be emphasizing suffering and the power of nature. And then for number 3, Owen emphasizes how the natural world is the chief or the main enemy of the soldiers. He describes, and we're going to use bullets less deadly than the air. And then I want you to support it with the frost shriveling many hands. So let's look at these two quotations. Less deadly than the air. So the air being described with this adjective of deadly, again showing the power of nature. This frost shriveling many hands, shriveling, the verb, and it's going to kill some of the soldiers, which emphasizes the horror of war. Okay, you have the rest of the lesson now to write up those 3 answers. Before you do that, you probably find it helpful to reread the poem to yourself, then write up your answers here. And I will see you tomorrow.